Hello DV Besties! If you are a crafty beginner, a Cricut beginner, or just a cutting machine beginner, this video is for you because we are going through 5 commonly misunderstood tools in Cricut Design Space and rapid fire teaching you how to use them correctly. Not only is this going to save you so much time on your projects, it's also going to give you a better understanding of how to make your designs more complex and more personalized. Also, if you're new here, this is the Design Bundles YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell because we are back here every week with all the crafty tips, tricks, and tutorials that you won't want to miss. And my name is Laura. You can find me personally at It's Laura Lambert all across social media and here on YouTube as well. With all that being said, let's jump right into our first tip in Cricut Design Space. Okay, so here we are with a canvas in Cricut Design Space. I've already pulled in a few designs. All of these are included in the Design Bundles Plus library, so if you like anything you see here, you can go find them in our Plus library. Let's start with this little skeleton girl. So I'm gonna kind of move her down, and I'm gonna move these off to the side so they're not distracting. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna talk about is the contour feature. And contour is really great for single layered SVG files or SVG files that don't have that many layers that you would prefer to break into additional layers. So for example, I've got this little skeleton who is drinking her morning cup of coffee, and maybe I want the steam on her coffee cup to be cut in a different material or in a different color. That's gonna be hard to do right now because this is just a one layered SVG. So that's where you can use contour to break it into additional pieces. The first thing I'm gonna do before I contour is duplicate this skeleton by selecting the duplicate button up here. So the reason we duplicate is because when I contour out the steam in just a second, I'll wanna create a separate SVG that has just the steam. It'll all make sense here in just a second. Let's just do it and it will totally make more sense. But what I'm essentially trying to say is when I contour it out, I want to leave a copy of the original so that I can grab the steam for the second one. A little pro tip when you're using contour is I like to move my SVG kind of off to the side because when I open my contour panel in a second, it's going to cover the middle of my canvas and I like to be able to see a preview of what's going to happen. So I'm going to click contour. You can see it opens up this new window above our canvas. So I've got my SVG over here in the corner so I can still see what I'm doing. Now to get you familiar with what you're looking at, the contour panel is going to show us every cut line that the Cricut is planning to cut for this SVG. So everything in light gray is a cut line, and then everything in dark gray is going to be what's left behind with material after the cut that we'll have to weed out eventually. It also shows us this little side panel layer that contains all the different cuts as individual shapes. Some people like to use this when they're doing contour to select out what they want to remove. I think that can be extremely complicated, especially when we get down to these little shapes right here and it's kind of hard to tell what you're looking at. So I like to use my preview panel, and the way I do it is I just zoom in, and then just by simply selecting the steam, I'm telling Cricut, I want to contour that out. I want to remove it. I don't want that to be cut anymore on this layer. And you can see that when I click it, not only does it become a paler gray, it's also removed down here in my preview. Now, a quick side note about contour is you always want to hover over and watch the Cricut highlight what you're contouring out before you click. Because let's say, for instance, I wanted to contour out this coffee cup. When I hover over it, I can see that that's actually all one continuous line that goes around the entire skeleton. So if I clicked that, I would be removing the entire thing. So that is something to look out for when you're using contour. When you're done contouring, you can just click the X. And now we have this new version of our SVG with the steam removed. And the reason I had you duplicate is because we're gonna go contour again on this second version. And we're gonna contour out everything except the steam, so we have it left behind. So I'm gonna get rid of her whole body. I'm gonna go in and get all these little pieces here. Basically just contouring out every little thing that I don't want included anymore. You can get really creative with this and create some really cool SVG files if you play around with contour. We could create some cool layered effects where maybe her eyes are gonna be layered on in a different color. You don't need to click the inside of your cut line. That kind of ends up doing the opposite effect of what you want to do. So I'm going back in and getting all these inside pieces. I don't know why I did that. You can see in my preview over here that we're getting done what we want to get done here. You can see I'm really using my preview behind me as a guide to make sure I'm clicking the right thing. I would say as you're learning to use contour, that's the most complicated part of it, is understanding what you're clicking and not clicking. So I actually am gonna click out all the centers because it looks like the way this file is created, we need to do both, which is totally fine. And zooming in even more would also probably help solve this problem just a little bit. You can also see that when I clicked the outline to remove it, it automatically contoured in all the insides. So that's why we're kind of having to go through and select the insides to remove now. That's just kind of a part of what it does as it anticipates what you're maybe trying to do with this file. And there we go. Now we're gonna click X. And now you can see we have our steam and our coffee cup as a separate layer. So now they can be manipulated separately. And that is the contour feature. That's probably the most complicated feature we're gonna talk about today. The others are some of my favorites. I use them all the time. And we're gonna use this sloth right here to talk about our next two features, which are weld and attach. Now, in terms of weld and attach, I think these are the most commonly mixed up features in Cricut Design Space. So let's take just a minute and clear them up. Attach helps you keep different elements in the same relative space when your Cricut cuts the file. So what I mean by that is your Cricut is automatically going to place your different cuts in the most efficient spacing possible to save material. But when I select attach, I'm telling the Cricut, I don't want you to save material, I don't want you to reorganize these, I want you to cut them exactly as they appear on the canvas in the same relative space to each other. But attach will maintain the separate cut lines for each element. Weld is a little bit different. Does it keep things in the same relative space like attach? Yes, but the difference is weld is going to actually meld those cut lines together, especially if they're overlapping, into one cut line. It's keeping them in the same relative space and also combining them down into one layer. Now, if your elements don't touch each other, which we'll see in just a second, they can appear to do exactly the same thing. But if you have overlapping elements, this is where weld and attach can be very different. Because while attach will maintain all the separate cut lines for each element, weld will combine them down into one. So let's look at what that actually looks like on the computer. So I've got this sloth right here, and I've already got him separated out into all his separate layers, so I've ungrouped him. We're gonna move our flamingos off to the side here. I've already got him ungrouped as much as possible. You do wanna go ahead and ungroup all your layers before you proceed with weld and attach, or things can get really messed up. So I've got it ungrouped down to all the individual layers. You can see that right here. And I've also got my text layer right here. And that's really what we're concerned with today. So if I click Make It, and I go to that color where the text is, you can see that our claws are kind of in the wrong spot and our text is way closer to our eyes and our nose than it is in the canvas. But if I'm placing all these layers individually when I put my sticker together, it's not going to matter. If I come through and I say, I actually want this and this and this, those three all in the same color to be cut exactly as they appear, I can select Attach. And when I go to Make It, you can see now that it looks exactly like it does on the canvas. Now, is that gonna waste a little extra vinyl? Yes. But if I wanna lay this down all as one layer, that's gonna save me a ton of time to do it this way. Now, let's detach these and let me show you what it would look like if I had welded them instead. Also, you see we're missing the eyes here. We're not actually missing them. When you select Attach or Weld, all of those layers are gonna move to the top. All it did was just move those to the top. I could easily move it right back up and we'd be cooking exactly how we want to be. Okay, let's say we did weld. Now, because none of these layers touch each other, it's going to appear when I click Combine and Weld that it did the exact same thing. If I go to Make It and I go down to that layer, it's gonna look exactly like it looked when I did Attach. And that's because none of these layers are overlapping. Remember, the main difference between weld and attach is evident with overlapping layers. So let's look at what that looks like. I'm going to go backwards. So these aren't welded anymore. Let's say we wanted to attach the background of our sloth and the letters. I really don't know why you would do that, but let's just say for example's sake that we want to. So I select them both and I select Attach. They are now in the same relative space. They're also going to be cut in the same color because they're attached. When I go to click Make It, you can see that they're attached to each other. They're in the same relative space on top of each other, but all the cut lines are still maintained. So if I wanted to weed out the letters of this and make that kind of like you see through the background or something, that would be a great use of Attach in this case. And we can see that we could weed out our letters. It looks good. All the cut lines are still there. If I select Weld, we're gonna get a very different result because these overlap. because when I select weld, we're telling the Cricut we want to combine this down into one layer. And what's going to happen when we do that is our cut lines for just hanging out are just going to go away because it was welded into the background layer. So they're now one. They're now combined as one. This is going to look totally different. We've lost our letters. They're not there anymore. So weld is really useful if you want to combine two different shapes into one shape. But just be mindful that it is very different from attach when we're dealing with overlapping elements. Okay, so we've talked about contour, we've talked about weld, we've talked about attach. Let's also talk about the slice feature. Let's hop on over to these flamingos really quick, and I'm going to show you how slice can really come in handy for your projects, especially if you get creative with it. I like to think of the slice feature like a cookie cutter. So when I use slice, I'm telling it, take this shape and cookie cut it through the shape underneath it. A very important thing to remember when we're using the slice feature is we can only ever slice two elements at a time. There's whatever we're slicing and whatever we're slicing with. No more, no less. So let's say I wanted to put like a monogram in the middle of this flamingo. I might go to my shapes and I might select a circle and say, I want to punch out a circle in the middle of this flamingo where I can put a letter and it doesn't look too busy behind it. So I would take my circle and put it right over top my flamingo wherever I want my letter to go. And then I can select my flamingo, select my circle, select slice, and you can see we're going to get several slice results that are visible in our panel. One of those slice results is what was punched through the flamingo. One is what is left of our circle after punching, and one is what the cookie cutter took out of the flamingo. So usually when you use the slice feature, you'll end up getting rid of all of those slice results. You probably don't want them for anything else. There's very rare occasions where you might want to use it or it's actually what you intended to use. Most of the time though, you'll be dealing with what remains, which in this case is an empty space for us to put a little monogram, a letter, whatever we want to put there to make this flamingo something new and unique. Most people use slice feature with a shape and their original SVG, just like we did here. But there are also instances where you might slice one SVG through another SVG or a pattern through another pattern. The key to remember here is that we're only ever slicing two elements at a time, one that is the slicer and one that is the slicey. Okay, that's the slice feature. The last feature I want to talk about today is Flatten, and this one is really simple. It is a print then cut feature built into Cricut Design Space to take any SVG that is multi-layered for cutting and turn it into a one-layer print then cut element. Kind of a little backstory on the Flatten feature to help you understand how it works is SVGs are multi-layered cut files. DXF files are also multi-layered cut files. They are built on the basis of curves and pathways that tell the Cricut what path to cut or tell your silhouette what path to cut out the element. Because they are built that way, they're able to be multi-layered, meaning we can tell it, here's a path I want you to cut, and that's a layer. And then also, built on top of it, here's another path I want you to cut, and that's another layer. And that's how we're able to manipulate these files individually on their layers to make them different colors, different materials, or whatever you're planning to do. But when we're doing sublimation or printable vinyl or stickers, the file type is much different. Those are flat files, like PNGs, JPEGs, PDFs even. Those are flat in that all the data contained for that image is in one layer. I'm telling the Cricut, I don't need you to know that the beak is a separate layer to cut out or the flamingo's body is a separate layer to cut out. I just need you to know that this is a pretty picture and we're printing it out and that our Cricut is going to cut around the entire outline of that image. So it basically simplifies it into something that is flat and one layer. Now with all that being said, Flatten is just a way to tell Cricut, we don't need this on separate layers, we don't want this on separate layers, I just want you to cut the outline of this entire thing and print the rest. So I only need the data to be housed in one layer. So all I'm gonna do is select the entire image of my flamingo, select Flatten, and you can see that this just becomes one layer now. And you can also see that it's now a print then cut under the operation. Not only is it listed as a print then cut under operation now, but the option to change it is grayed out. And that's because I've taken what was multi-layered and flattened it down to one layer. And I've already told the Cricut, I'm printing this out on a printer and then I just want you to cut out the outline. Let's say I wanted to make this like maybe a little monogram at the bottom and a big flamingo. I can select the entire thing and flatten it, and we've just made a giant print then cut sticker. So you can take multiple SVGs and flatten them all together. This is where people can take tableaus of a lot of characters or repeats of patterns and flatten them down into really complex print then cuts. So it can be a really fun thing to play with. I love using Flatten for my sublimation projects and my other print then cut designs. Okay, DB besties, that is 5 commonly misunderstood Cricut Design Space tools that you need to understand if you are a beginner crafter and you're looking to make your crafting easier, more efficient, and just level up your game. We covered contour, we covered welding and attaching and the difference between the two since they're commonly mixed up. We covered the flatten feature and we covered the slice feature. Once you understand all 5 of these Cricut Design Space features, you are going to be able to make so much more complex and customized designs. I'm so excited for you. If you're interested in learning more about Cricut Design Space or really just anything about the technical aspects of crafting that you have questions about, feel free to leave those comments below. We do read them, and I would love to use them to create more videos for you guys that are truly helpful to you and that you're excited to learn about. So with that being said, I hope you love this video. Feel free to follow us everywhere else on social media. We are Design Bundles. We are here to support you in your crafting journey and help you live a more creative life. You can also follow me personally at It's Laura Lambert everywhere on social media and here on YouTube. I also post all the crafty tips, tricks, and tutorials, and I'm just excited to get to know you better. So shoot me a DM, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, DB besties, happy crafting.